Welcome everybody to the February installment of our digital dealer exclusive mystery quilt with Kimberbell and Material Girls. Are we excited to see what the hint gives us for our next blocks? So this was the hint that I gave you back at the end of January, or at the end of January's video. And this was our hint for February. And here is part one of 2 blocks that we will make for February. We're going to be making 2 each of 2 different style blocks. All right, we're going to be starting with this cute little toadstool that's here. You want to go ahead and get out your February bag. We are going to kind of split the fabrics into the 2 blocks. We also have an adorable little snail that we're going to be doing this month as well. And we'll go ahead and prep our fabrics, and then we'll come back here and talk about hoops and setting up our particular design. All right. So over here we have the blocks broken out here for what we're going to need. So each of our background pieces, that's the large peach squares and the yellow with the white dot squares, you want to go ahead and place a piece of fusible woven on the back of both of those backgrounds. You also want to take the white rectangles that you have 2 of them, and you want to place a piece of fusible woven on the back side of that white rectangle. We're going to also need to get out our flexi foam. If you've not already gotten out that flexi foam, you need your 2 3 by 2.5 pieces, and you need 2 2.5-inch squares. Okay, so we need 2 pieces for the toadstool and 2 pieces for our snail. And just so you can see, there is what this stack will become, and there is what that stack will become. So super cute. This one's got cute background quilting with toadstools and snails in it. This has got some flowers, and I think there's also, there may be, I think this one, oh, there's a bee as well right there. So in our quilting portion, if you are quilting in the hoop, you're also going to need 2 5-inch squares of batting for each of these block designs. Okay, we have 2 toadstools to do and 2 snails. So you go ahead and cut yourself 2 5-inch squares of batting. We are also going to need the square of embroidery topping. Now this is the piece the little section that I used here on this block. So it's plenty big enough to do what we need. So it's that piece that I told you was in your embellishment kit that kind of looked like a piece of trash bag. That's your embroidery topping that we're going to need for our toadstool block. And then in with our snail block, we have this piece of like green vinyl. This is called jelly vinyl. It's kind of a translucent colored vinyl. So that will go with your snail block. We are going to take our threads for our toadstool. We're going to need red, charcoal, and cream. I've already got the cream in my machine because I'm ready to set up and go ahead and start quilting. And then in the toadstool, she tells you you're going to need charcoal, cream, brown. She calls for light green. Okay, we actually did our snail in 2 colors. We did the outline of his body we did in the darker green, and the eyeballs we did in the lighter green. You can do them both in the same color. They are separate color stops, so they don't have to be the same color. Feel free to choose whatever you would like for your snail, but we're going to get to him later. We're going to start with the toadstool. Okay. So go ahead and let's get your background fabric and everything prepped, your batting, get all of your pieces that you need for that, and then we'll come back over to the machine and set up our design. Now, our design is going to be set up pretty much identical to the way that the ladybug was set up that we talked about in January. with the mystery quilt. So I have already placed, again, the designs in my folder for mystery quilt on my USB stick. I'm going to open up February, and then I'm going to open up background quilting. This month you have 2 background quilting files that will be in there. Okay, we have a spring 6 and a spring 7 that are there. We're going to be using spring 6 for the Toadstool. So I'm going to open up spring 6. I'm then going to choose embroidery files. And remember, because we're doing the quilting with the embroidery at the same time, we're using the block by block format. I'm going to use the EXP format because that's the brand of machine I'm using. And we are looking for the design that is 4 by 4 square. So again, the design names can be long, so you may not be able to see everything, but I know that this is the beginning here of my 4-inch sizes. So I have 410, 412, 414, and then the next one is 4 by 4. Okay, so I'm going to open that one up. You can see his cute little quilting design. We've got toadstools and snails, inchworms, and then I'm going to come over to my machine and I'm going to add the embroidery design. So I'm going to back out to February. I'm going to choose embroidery files folder, the format of your machine for me, which is EXP, and then I'm going to choose the toadstool. And I'm just going to add that right to the design. I'm not going to move it. Everything is going to stay aligned in center. Okay. You can also see that this design is going to need the small clamp hoop for the World of Berninas, or it can also be done in that oval hoop, which is a standard accessory with the Berninas, so everyone has an oval hoop. But I am going to work in the small clamp. It's just a little bit tinier, a little bit less stabilizer. That will be used. Okay. And then we have our design. If you'd like, you can go ahead and save that design, or we'll just use it like it is, and then you can recombine it later. All right, so again, in the block by block format, we are going to place a piece of light mesh cutaway inside of our hoop. We've already got our design set up and the alignment again is centered. That's there, and then we're going to work through the steps of quilting our block. If you are not quilting in the hoop, you can place a piece of medium cut stabilizer in the hoop, center your background fabric over the center of that stabilizer, and then you'll be ready to embroider directly onto that square. So we're going to head over to the machine here, and we're going to work through the steps of quilting the background quilting of our block. I have loaded in my machine, again, neutral color thread in the bobbin. I have cream colored thread in the top of my machine. I'm going to run the first color stop, which is going to stitch a placement line for my batting. There's my batting placement line. I'm going to take my batting. I'm going to place it over top of that line, making sure all of the lines are covered. Doesn't need to be covered equally as long as the line is covered. And then we're going to tack the batting in place. Once our batting is tacked in place, we're going to take the hoop off of the machine. Do not remove your project from the hoop, and we're going to trim away the excess batting as close as we can to that tack down line. Once your batting is all trimmed, I skip color stop 3. Again, I'm pretty sure I know where this very large piece of fabric is going to go to cover this, so I'm actually going to skip color stop 3. I'm going to place my fabric right side up, completely covering all of that batting. And then I'm going to run that 4th color stop, which is going to tack this in place. Do not trim the excess fabric from around the edge. Okay, we leave it all there. We'll trim it all up when we get it out of the machine. Once our fabric is in place and we are ready to go, we are going to quilt on color stop 5. If you are not currently using the color that you plan to quilt in, please change your upper thread to your quilting thread color. Once your quilting is in place, you are now going to start working on the embroidery design. We are going to work through appliquing the foam, the flexi foam that we have for the top of our toadstool. So staying in the cream colored thread, we are going to stitch a placement line. We are then going to place our flexi foam over top of that line, run the next color stop, which will stitch the flexi foam in place, and then we're going to trim as much flexi foam away from around that placement line as we can. Okay, so this is just to give your toadstool a little bit of puff that we have there in our design. The next thing we're going to do is applique our stem. The same steps that we use to applique the foam, we're going to be using again to applique the fabric for the stem. We're going to run the color stop to run our placement line. We're going to place our stem fabric right side up, covering all of that placement line. Tack the stem in place, and then trim the excess fabric up all the way around. Once your fabric has been appliqued in place, we are going to run the color stop that is going to satin stitch around the edge to finish up the raw edge, and then the next color stop is decorative detail that is going to run a straight stitch through the middle of that satin. So if you are quilting in the hoop, these two steps actually become color stops. 10 is going to do your satin stitching, and 11 is going to do your decorative stem detail. Once your charcoal or decorative stitch detail is complete, we're going to go ahead and change out to red thread, and we're going to work through appliquing the top of our toadstool. So again, following that same program, we're going to stitch a placement line. We're going to place our fabric right side up, completely covering that placement line, and then we're going to tack our fabric down, and then we will trim our fabric as close as we can. And then once our fabric is trimmed, we can go ahead and run the cover stitch that is going to stitch the outside edge of our toadstool. Let me give you a little hint. Sometimes you're not exactly sure if you have trimmed up far enough or close enough to your fabric or to your placement line. So if your design is going to be finished with a satin stitch, so that edge around is going to be satin stitched, typically a digitizer puts in 2 columns. So there's 2 straight lines that run on the outside and inside. And then usually they come back with a zigzag to finish the edge. If any fabric is sticking outside of that outside edge right there, your fabric is going to show. It's not going to get caught in the satin stitch. This outside edge that's right there is going to be the outermost edge of your satin stitch. So after you have run that portion of that color stop, you can stop the machine, take the hoop off the machine, and make any other sort of adjustments or try to trim closer before the final satin stitch happens. Our next color stop is going to put the spots on top of our toadstool. But before we hit go, we need to place the embroidery topping over top of those spots. So the purpose of this embroidery topping is to act like a color shield, to keep the red from the toadstool base from shadowing through our spots and making them not look cream that's there. So this piece of embroidery topping goes on, we embroider through it, and then we tear it off. It's very easy. So again, Like, it's just designed to keep these the right color and not, if you've ever stitched or embroidered like a snowman on a jean jacket or a white section on a black piece of fabric, and that white just now looks kind of gray, this will help prevent that from happening. So we're going to just place it over top. You can tape it in place if you like, and then we're just going to run the color stop. Our design is now finished. We can just tear away this embroidery topping. It pretty much perforates right off, just like that. Save the rest of it. You can use it for another project. If you have a small section that they don't want to kind of they didn't peel off, or you have a scrap left behind, a pair of tweezers is going to be your best friend at being able to grab a hold of it. At this point, this design is now finished. You can remove this design from the hoop. We are going to repeat all of this process and make a second one. So you should have 2 toadstools for your quilt. And then once those are finished, go ahead and remove it from the hoop, set them aside. We will trim them up when we finish our snails. Both blocks are getting trimmed to the same size, so I'll show you how to trim them up once we have all our blocks complete. And then we are going to move on to our little snail friend that's there. Everything is pretty much going to be the same in terms of how we set him up. With the exception, we are going to be using the Spring 7 4x4 design. Okay, so it is a different background quilting design that we are going to use for this little guy. Go ahead, and if you've not done so, we need to place the SF101 fusible woven lining or fusible backing to the wrong side of the background fabrics, which are the yellow with the white polka dot, as well as the white rectangles, which are referred to as the body base that's in there. Get those fused on, and then we'll be ready to start embroidering. Let's take a look at just reviewing the setup of the particular design. So once I have completed the design that I have, I will hit the folder option. I'm going to travel out to a new design. I'm going to go back to my USB stick, work into my mystery folder, February background quilting. And then again, we're going to be using Spring 7 embroidery files, block by block. And then pick your machine format. And then I'm going to navigate to the 4x4 design, which is this flower and bee. And then I'm going to add the February embroidery file, format of your machine, pick up our little snail. We're going to leave him dead center. Nothing, we're not going to move him. He's good to go. Once you have your design set up, we are ready to work through the steps of quilting. Okay, you've got your mesh cutaway in the hoop. We're going to run our placement line, put our batting in place, tack our batting, trim our batting, and then place our fabric, get our fabric in place, and then we're going to run the quilting design. Now I've already got my batting in place, trimmed, and my fabric tacked down. I'm just going to hit the start button in the cream colored fabric, and I'm going to run the quilting design for this block. Once our quilting is complete, we're going to leave in that cream colored thread, and we are going to work through appliquing the flexi foam for the snail's shell. So just like we did with the toadstool top, we're going to repeat that process now for the snail's shell. Once the snail's shell is trimmed, or the foam is trimmed for the snail's shell, we're going to work through the process of appliquing the body base. That's going to be the white rectangle of fabric that we have placed a piece of fusible woven on the back side of. We're going to run the placement line, fabric right side up. Make sure you look closely, since the fusible woven is the same color as the fabric, that you don't accidentally put the fusible woven up. ultimately it wouldn't be the end of the world because this section is going to get covered with the green jelly vinyl. We're going to place it right side up, tack it down, and then we're going to trim the excess as close to the line as we can. Once our body base is complete, our next step is going to be stitching the cover stitch, the satin stitching that's going to finish here, as well as his eyes. We have to think about this for a moment because the satin stitching on his body is ultimately going to get covered with the piece of green jelly vinyl. Okay, so this vinyl is going to cover up this portion of his body as well as the satin stitch that's there. And then you have his eyes are going to be stitched as part of this, or the stems of his eyes, if you want to call it. So when you're thinking about which green to use, okay, you have a choice. Remember, I gave you have those two greens. She calls for light green. This is going to get covered here, and then you're going to see it with his eyes. Won't get covered, so you're going to see the true color. So it's going to be your choice if maybe you prefer that this be the portion that you see in true color, because ultimately the satin stitching around his body is going to get covered with this piece of green vinyl. You're not going to see it. So if you really doesn't matter again what color you choose, okay, the only portion of this green that you're going to see in true color is going to be his eyes. Okay. So with that being said, we are going to change to that color of thread. We are going to satin stitch the eye stalk details and the body base outline. And then we're going to applique the jelly vinyl. The jelly vinyl applique has a little bit of a different flow because we don't really need a placement line, right? We know it's going to cover his entire body. We're going to place it over top of the entire body base, and then we're going to run the stitch, the tack down. This tack down is also going to be the decorative stitch that is part of what is holding the fabric down. This jelly vinyl doesn't get satin stitched or anything like that. It's a triple stitch that goes around it. So at that point, you can also make a decision as to which color you want that to be. So let me zoom in here so that you can see. We did all of this in the light green, okay? So you, like again, you can't see the light green satin stitching that's underneath the vinyl. It's covered. The light green is going around this stitch right here and is his eye stalks. Right there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the light green in my machine, and then I'm going to work through these steps of getting the jelly vinyl attached to the design. Now remember, before you get started, the jelly vinyl does not go on yet. We need to stitch the satin stitching first. Here is our jelly vinyl all stitched on. We need to do some trimming of this. And if you look at the instructions, they tell you to trim as desired. This is going to be a raw edge applique. So you can leave as much as you want. It's not going to get finished around the edge. The way that I focused on this was I got rid of what I didn't really want around the area where we still need to applique and embroider. So I need to get rid of the jelly vinyl here and from here. Sometimes it's a little easier to do the rest of the trimming outside, especially with the leathers and the vinyls that are there. I kind of based my cutting line right at the edge of that satin stitch that's on the underside. And I'm just going to come in here with my scissors, and I'm just kind of following my scissors along that edge of that satin stitch. Okay. If you're comfortable, you can continue to go all the way around. Again, just sometimes it can be easier to do some of this once it comes out of the particular hoop, but it's up to you. You can always clean it up once you're finished, where you can get in there and you can kind of fold back the fabric out of the way and do any sort of additional trimming that you want. Like, I probably would trim that down a little bit. It's there. So it's completely up to you. Okay. There he is, all trimmed, and now the appropriate color. Our next steps are to work through appliquing the shell of our snail. So we are going to run the placement line. I would do this all in brown thread. We'll run the placement line. We will then place our shell fabric right side up, completely covering all of that placement line. The fabric that we're using for the shell is a solid, so no need to worry about which one's right or wrong. That's on there. And then we will tack the shell in place and then trim as much of the outside edge of the fabric away. And then we will run the color stop that will stitch the cover stitch of our design and the decorative detail of the design. So we'll run through that satin stitching and the decorative swirl that's on our shell. The final two color stops of our snail design are going to be the whites of his eyes and his pupils and smile. So we're going to do cream, and then we will follow it with our charcoal thread color. And once those are complete, we can take the hoop off the machine, take that block out of the hoop, and then repeat to make a second snail block. Now, when both of your snail blocks and both of your toadstools are complete, they both get trimmed the same way. We're going to be trimming them down to the 4.5-inch square that is on our block, or using the orange pop rulers for. So let's take a look here. I'm going to zoom in a little closer. So here is one of my snail blocks. Again, we're going to be trimming up to a 4.5-inch square. You can, if you're using quilting in the hoop, you can use this basting line to trim this up to a 4.5-inch square. I would double check to make sure that that has not shrunk or moved any, and make sure it truly is a 4.5-inch square. If it is a little smaller, you just need to adjust, maybe cut to the outsides of the lines, just so you make sure you have a 4.5-inch square. Even though I am quilting in the hoop, I'm still going to use my orange pop rulers to help make sure that it stays square. Okay, so I'm going to take the 4.5-inch square of my orange pop. I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to follow that up with my 6.5-inch square. And again, I'm going to use my Sew Tight Matin boosters. Okay. And I'm going to get this positioned so that that 4.5-inch square lines up approximately with that 4.5-inch basting box that we have in there. And then I'm going to cut all the way around to pop him out. I'll have two snails. Now, if you are not using the quilting in the hoop option, you just need to center your block inside of the orange pop. Now, if you don't know, the Orange Pop does have some little center triangles or arrows that are pointing. So you could take your background fabric. If you marked where the center of your background fabric was, you can line up those center indicators that are on the Orange Pop rulers with the lines that you used to mark the center of your fabric. And then that will help you make sure that you are centered inside of this 4.5-inch square. For this month, we have the 2 toadstools and 2 snails that we are going to add to our quilt. All right, that is everything that I have for you this month. Pretty quick, pretty easy, nice refresher or beginner blocks that we have. So super exciting for those that are just beginning your adventure. I think this is the perfect project to get more confident with embroidery. And with that, here is our hint towards the March block. Kind of exciting, really, really pretty. And we'll be back here again right around March 1st with the instructions on what you need to do to create the next block. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful month.